Welcome to episode 12 of my Kerbal Space Program NASA series. Finally getting into the shuttle program, but we got a couple things to take care of before we get to our first launch. This is the launch of Voyager 1. It's pretty much identical to the MOHO probe I sent. I just have some additional mapping software or hardware on it. So just running the launch at 4 times time acceleration because it's exactly like the MOHO probe. Pretty simple stuff. Once again, but trying to get some more unmanned missions taken care of, because trying to keep this realistic, the furthest out I'm going to be sending a manned mission will be Duna. So if I want to get anything out to any of the outer planets, this is going to be the way we'll be doing it. Which I've been playing around with 0.25. I'm getting kind of excited about maybe starting my next series, but I want to get this one finished. Get my Joule encounter set up here. It's a lot easier to hit than MOHO. And just set that up. And this is where things went a little unexpectedly. Well, it was expectedly wrong, because MOHO is kind of a hard target to hit. You can have a rendezvous window, but it might not be perfect. And I was just short of enough delta V to get into a capture orbit, so I recognized pretty early on this was going to have to be a flyby mission, so I decided to do most of my observations for the distance science, just to have that done. We can always send another probe later. Yes, even though I knew I wasn't going to hit it, didn't stop me from trying, because I was just hoping against all hope that maybe I'd get a little bit of a gravity assist on my way back out, but that was not the case. So I'm starting to think if I had just set that up with a single engine instead of the duals, I would have had a little bit better mass ratio and probably could have hit it. But I figured I'd just burn what I've got. I did at least get near MOHO science, so that was fortuitous. That little engine's just burning away, but it's not going to be enough. So that was a little depressing, but, you know, who knows? Maybe it'll drift across somebody else's orbit and I can use it further down the line. But here is what I have been waiting for, me personally, because I've been really excited to get my shuttle program started. Like I said, this is going to be running at time acceleration, so there's it's not going to be too in-depth. What I'm doing on this flight is I'm launching a cacti space telescope. Even though the Hubble was launched pretty late into the shuttle's lifespan, this is pretty much the only way right now I can make the shuttle pay off on a science front. So that's what we're doing. And like I said, this video is stripped down, not edited, but it's running at time acceleration. This is essentially exactly like my 10-ton payload to high Kerbal in orbit video. So if you want a little more in-depth you know, insight into this type of mission, that's a pretty good video to watch. And I pitched over shallow a little too soon, and so my you can see my angle of attack is pretty extreme there, wasting quite a bit of delta V burning off the prograde vector, but had to use a lot of thrust just to keep it going upwards. As we get a little higher, though, it gets a little easier to control. Well, it gets a little easier to build some velocity prograde, so start being able to lower the nose. This was not my prettiest shuttle ascent, because it was kind of improvised. It's been a while since I've had to carry such a heavy payload. And the tonnage of the cacti space probe, I wanted to just use Kerbal Engineer to get an exact weight on it, but last time I checked, for some reason it's not calculating it correctly with the cacti parts. So I just have to guesstimate. It's somewhere between 9 and 10 tons. I think it's actually closer to 9 tons. Still a pretty respectable weight, but for truly supermassive payloads, I'm going to have to be using disposable launchers. And this is where things get really wild, because I'm trying to use as much of the fuel in this main tank to get my orbit where I want it. Trying to minimize what I'm using in the OMS. Checking my range extension tanks to make sure they're not burnt out because of a crossfeed enabler. And I finally figured out just pretty much the perfect place to point the nose of this shuttle so that I'm actually thrusting directly at the maneuver node, because the OMS pods are off-axis, and you can compensate for that, especially because they have that wonderful plug-in that has them fire through the center of mass. But your nose, the actual heading indicator, is not going to be where your thrust is happening, basically. So if you just kind of pitch up a little above the node, then things will work out pretty well. And this capture goes a lot better than it did in my previous video. Unfortunately, I've got my docking port rotated 90 degrees, so I had to kind of adapt a little bit and figure out what all my controls had translated to. But it really wasn't that much of a big deal. And truth be told, I don't actually have to capture it. I just kind of like having everything all in one spot. This is so much fun to fly, honestly. This is, out of everything I've ever designed in this game, this space shuttle is probably my all-time favorite. And because, once again, the solar arrays are too wide to fit onto the telescope and fit it into the bay, we're doing a little on-orbit assembly here, thanks to a Kerbal attachment system. Using the rivets on that texture map as a guide point, so I get those at least somewhat symmetrical. They don't have to be perfect. Just, it's more about aesthetics. I could stick them wherever I wanted, honestly. Have a little difficulty translating away because I hadn't slaved my control node over to the cockpit yet. But we get the telescope deployed, which is quite a beautiful mod, actually. The old school scroll type solar panels that Hubble originally launched with. I figured that was a little too close to the sun. Dres was at a better orientation from the sun. And I'm running into some bugs with cacti. I've been trying to fix it, and I'm starting to get active on the forums asking for help. So, who knew? I haven't played with it since 0.23, and the original mod developer has since gone inactive. It's been picked up by another developer, but you can see right there. And I can't tell if that's because I haven't fixed my transmitter from remote tech, or I might not have fixed it. I've got to dig into the CFG file to see if it's still being slaved over to the remote tech configuration. But so yeah, that's a bunch of fun stuff. And because returning from high Kerbin orbit is so stressful, I decided to pretty much replicate my previous Cacti Space Telescope video exactly and stair-step down. Decided to lower my periaps down to 100 and then come in from that. And actually, if I wasn't pulling those range extension tanks, I probably would have had just barely enough fuel to complete my retro burn. But I don't like that, you know, 0.005% fuel margin, especially because getting too high curb in orbit can get kind of sloppy when you've got to worry about jettisoning that main tank when it sort of still hit the atmosphere. And you can see I'm starting to have some UI glitches. At this point, I'd forgotten that sometimes when you dock and undock, B9 control surfaces lose their, well, they just stop working. So that's going to lead to some problems later, which defeated my hope of running this all in one take. I do show it, but it seems like whenever I undock something, I've been getting this UI glitch lately. So, but usually I say usually, every time a quick save, quick load fixes it. But I was blissfully unaware that I had some other issues running under the hood here. But that's why I do quick save quite often, because running 64-bit, I'm kind of on the bleeding edge of what can go wrong. And the problem is I get so wrapped up in actually flying this and maneuvering it that I don't actually pay attention to the space shuttle model and what's going on with it until much later. This should have been the dead giveaway right now if I were paying attention to the actual ship, because those control surfaces should be moving, and instead they're totally frozen. And I'm not playing with the Dang It mod, which introduces random failures. So just doing our standard spaceplane return here. If I were going to fly a spaceplane with some sort of jet engine, returning would be so much easier. You don't have to be as precise and kind of hit that postage stamp like you do with a glider, because honestly, no go-around capability is a pretty big deal. Everything's going well so far-ish. I've noticed, at this point I've noticed that my vertical speed is quite excessive and I'm not able to null it out like I usually do. But I was assuming that was a function of my return profile, because I was coming in a little steeper than I usually do. Still not paying attention to the fact that those control surfaces are doing exactly nothing. And this is where I start figuring out something's up, because I should be getting more lift than I've got. I haven't quite figured out what's up, but I've pretty well realized that there's a problem at this stage. And the UI glitch, that flicker, happens every time I right-click the mouse to move the camera, and it's interesting in that only the actual game UI flickers, the vanilla UI, all the, like Flight Engineer, Kerbal Alarm Clock, you can see those staying pretty well solid. And I just have no control authority. I can't get more than 20 degrees nose up on this, and just bleeding airspeed way too fast. At this stage, I usually have the space shuttle boosting into a climb, so I am reducing my airspeed, but I'm also getting into the thinner atmosphere, so I'm slowing the rate at which I lose it, and extending my range out to the Space Center. At this point, it becomes very obvious I'm not going to be making it back. And then it's right around here that I finally notice my control surfaces aren't doing anything. I've got absolutely no control authority at this point. And yep, checking them out, they are completely unresponsive. And I see if there's anything I can do, but there really isn't. And that, combined with that UI glitch, I go ahead and quick load. This is the exact same periapse location, so this is after the retro burn. I quick saved after that, after I did my retro burn, so that if I did have an issue, if planning my return was a problem, it was still going to be a problem. That was just in case I had some weird aerodynamics glitches, because sometimes Ferrum decides to get a little crazy. I'm dropping the periaps down, and already I can tell I've got a little better control authority. My lift profile is better, because I think when the control surfaces freeze, Ferrum even stops taking them into consideration for aerodynamics, so they don't even function as a wing extension. Got that nose super steep. Running this all in time acceleration once again. But I do want, I'm trying to show every second of this flight, so people get a pretty good idea of what's going on. That I'm not doing any behind the scenes cheating. And that is the Nav Utilities mod that has my runway approach instruments there. They are integrated in Raster Prop Monitor. I'm not confident enough to do a full IVA return on this yet, just because my my shuttle flying skills are kind of sketchy sometimes, and I don't have... I've been practicing, but other obligations like school, and totally admit a new obsession with a PlayStation 4 game I recently bought. Shadows of Mordor have kind of taken me away from Kerbal more than I'd like. I'm getting back into it. Obviously, this will be the second video I put out this week, so I'm trying to get myself a little better disciplined. And this is where I notice I'm carrying in way too much speed, so I just lock those speed brakes out and then start trying to do some banking S-turns like the real shuttle to bleed off that speed. Trying to modulate, because once those speed brakes come out, they do change aerodynamics, and so it tends to lose lift. So I've got to kind of balance between bleeding airspeed and keeping it from just diving into the atmosphere. It's harder to keep the nose up when those speed brakes are deployed. And I notice I'm way off from the runway, so I start trying to bank, simultaneously bleeding airspeed and aligning for the runway. And this is normal speed. I decided to show the final approach at normal speed just because this was kind of one of my wilder landings. I got so wrapped up in paying attention to the landing that I wasn't keeping an eye on my runway orientation. And this is actually way too high. If I didn't have those speed brakes on this thing, coming back would be absolutely impossible. You can see those solar panels on there. I put those in because I don't have RTGs unlocked, and there's really not a good place to stick the universal storage alkaline fuel cell on this thing at the moment, especially not when I was carrying a Cacti space telescope. That tends to fill up the entire cargo bay. And the altitude's a problem because when you're a glider, if you don't have speed brakes or anything to help modulate and control your speed, then to get down you have to point nose down, obviously, and you'll build up airspeed, but trying to land, airspeed tends to be the enemy. Especially in this version of Ferrum, I do have aerodynamic stresses still enabled, and so if I'm coming in too fast, abrupt maneuvers will shear the wings clean off the aircraft. I say aircraft. Want to make this entirely clear. This space shuttle does not fly. These wings are basically a substitute for a parachute on a pod. This sucker has a glide ratio very much in line with the real space shuttle. You can get it to climb, but it has to be, you have to use that as a aid for burning off airspeed. at no point is this thing in any type of stable flight, because while you're climbing, you're bleeding off so much airspeed because your angle of attack is so high. The drag on the airframe is just ridiculous. This is Buzz Lightyear. It does not fly, it falls with style. And you can see I'm having to angle that nose down, and this is where I'm starting to really clinch, because I've got to be real ginger with the controls, and I still have to bleed off airspeed while not stalling out, and have to make some pretty abrupt maneuvers without shredding the spacecraft. This is probably one of my worst shuttle approaches ever, yet simultaneously one of my best landings. Paradoxically enough. And I have done a couple landings that are just totally perfect. I hit the runway from orbit perfectly and don't even have to use the speed brakes. I've integrated the speed brakes because testing on my sandbox save showed I'm just not consistent enough to fly without them. Plus, the real shuttle actually had speed brakes. The rudder split, and that had the effect of also giving it additional nose-up attitude. See, I'm not going to hit the runway straight on, but I can kind of adjust my bank angle and just grease it down. Perfectly gentle landing. And this is where I'm furiously mashing the spacebar trying to stage that braking parachute. I love the sound effects that B9 has added to the landing gear. Well, I don't know if it was them specifically or if they integrated another mod. I just know I love it. And so there we have our safe return for the space shuttle. Looks rather nice sitting there. Loading screen of doom. And this is where, yeah, I've lost all my Final Frontier ribbons. Another reason I'm looking forward to 0.25 is I will be playing in 32-bit mode. 71,000 for the recovery of that spacecraft. I'm starting to think that instead of dumping any excess fuel, I'm just going to keep it in the tail of the shuttle, because that'll help my financial returns and also improve the lift-to-drag ratio by having all that mass in the back. And once again, start trying to fight with the Cacti telescope mod, and it's just not responding the way I was wanting it to. So I've got some work to do to get this thing figured out. Otherwise, this whole space flight was pretty well pointless. When I started the series, it was an active mod under active development. Not so much anymore. Like I said, it's been taken over, but there's the person who took it over has a lot of other things on their plate that they've got to handle, their own mods. But I absolutely love it because it's pretty unique and interesting mod. Flickering, it's a conflict with the Distant Objects Enhancement mod, which was made by the same guy who does the Cacti mod. He wasn't able to get them to be fully compatible with one another in 0.24, and then real life issues have precluded him from continuing development. So that is my project for the foreseeable future. But you can see, even right now, that's pretty stark, pretty impressive view right there. And it does save a screenshot fully rendered out. These graphics artifacts are turning up. And you can see that UI is just a mess. I have no idea what's causing that glitch. I'm afraid it's a conflict with another mod I've got going on. So that's my project. But not anything for you guys to worry about. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for future episodes and further adventures of the Space Shuttle program.